Indigenous Peoples of the United States will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on H-Day Resolution 55, the Prince Jonah Kuhio Akola ni au Nuola Lei Protecting Family Legacies Act, introduced by Mr. Kahele of Hawaii. H.R. 441 to provide for the conveyance of certain property to the Tana Tribal Council located in Tana, Alaska, and for other purposes, introduced by the ranking member of Alaska. H.R. 2402, the Winnebago Land Transfer Act of 2021, introduced by Mr. Fortenberry of Nebraska, and H.R. 4881, the Old Pasqua Community Land Acquisition Act, and H.R. 5221, the Urban Indian Health Undercommittee will the Urban Indian Health Confer Act, both introduced by the chair of the full committee, Chair Grijalba of Arizona. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all of the members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted by the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare recess subject to the call of the chair. Hearing no objection, so ordered. As described in the hearing notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Additionally, please note that as with in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. And again, as with our in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. With that, I will begin by recognizing myself for my opening statement. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are today. I want to start by welcoming our virtual witnesses and thanking them for joining us today to share their expertise and perspective. We have a full agenda and we'll hear from bill sponsors, the administration, and tribal leaders for today's legislative hearing. We have 5 bills on our docket that are all meant to uplift the health, economic development, and ultimately sovereignty of tribal nations and Native Hawaiians. So with that, let's get started in numerical order. First, we have House Joint Resolution 55, the Prince Jonah Kuhio Kala'anaiana Ole Protecting Family Legacies Act, introduced by our colleague, Mr. Kahele from Hawaii. In 1921, Congress passed the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, a government-sponsored homesteading program to support Native Hawaiians as defined through blood quantum. Since its passage, many homestead beneficiaries have faced obstacles to passing along their ancestral lands to their descendants due to the current program qualifications. In 2017, the Hawaii State Legislature passed Act 80 to amend the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act to reduce blood quantum requirements for lessee eligibility. The bill requests the consent of Congress to amend the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act and allow Native Hawaiians greater opportunity to participate in the homestead leasing program. I met with leaders of the Hawaiian homelands last August and understand their desire to see the blood quantum lowered so that their children and grandchildren may benefit from the benefits intended for their families. The second bill we will hear is H.R. 441 to provide for the conveyance of certain property to the Tana Tribal Council located in Tana, Alaska, and for other purposes, which was introduced by my friend Ranking Member Don Young from Alaska. Excuse me. The bill directs the Department of Health and Human Services to convey an 11.25 acre parcel to the Tana Tribal Council, an Alaska Native Tribal Health and Social Service Consortium that provides outpatient services in interior rural Alaska. The land conveyance will allow the Tana Tribal Council to expand health facilities and services. As we heard in our hearing on federal facilities in Indian country, tribal health facilities remain severely underfunded. We must continue to ensure that health facilities can adequately and safely serve our Indigenous communities. My apologies, we have really crazy pollen in New Mexico right now. The third bill is H.R. 2402, the Winnebago Land Transfer Act of 2021, introduced by our colleague, Mr. Fortenberry from Nebraska. The bill is intended to right a wrong committed by the federal government, which unfortunately is all familiar in our work on this subcommittee. The Winnebago Reservation was established by the Treaty of March 8, 1865. In the 1970s, without congressional authorization, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers acquired land from the Winnebago tribe through eminent domain. Despite this land transfer clearly infringing upon the 1865 treaty. Finally, after decades of disputes, the Winnebago Land Transfer Act of 2021 will rightfully return 2 tracts of land to the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska to be put into trust to benefit the tribe. Lastly, we will also hear about H.R. 4881 and H.R. 5221, both introduced by Chair Grijalva. H.R. 4881, the Old Pasqua Community Land Acquisition Act, will integrate a parcel of land to be taken into trust for the benefit of the Pasqua Yaqui tribe. Earlier this year, the Secretary of the Interior approved Arizona's amended and restated gaming compact that was signed by the state of Arizona and the Pasqua Yaqui tribe for Class 3 gaming. This updated compact included the transfer of land into trust for the tribe. This parcel contains the Old Pasqua community in Tucson, Arizona, a sacred ceremonial site for the tribe. The area is also recognized as the oldest formally established Yaqui community. The bill will allow the tribe to conduct gaming activities, expand economic development opportunities, and engage in cultural practices on its historical lands. The bill has bipartisan support from representatives in the state, including support from the city of Tucson, who entered into an intergovernmental agreement with the tribe. And lastly, we will hear about H.R. 5221, the Urban Indian Health Confer Act. Urban Indian organizations, or UIOs, are a pillar of the tribal healthcare system. In fact, 70% of the American Indian Alaska and Alaska Natives live in urban areas. Despite the importance and scale of UIO services, IHS is the only agency that maintains a legal obligation to confer with urban Indian organizations. This bill requires direct lines of communication between the Department of Health and Human Services and UIOs to ensure effective coordination and mutual understanding, especially when there are significant healthcare policy and initiative changes. With that, I appreciate my colleagues and witnesses for taking time out of their days to join us. I look forward to hearing more on all the legislation before us. I would now like to recognize Ranking Member Don Young for his opening statement. Representative Young from Alaska.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I hope you can see me and hear me. These are crazy things, these Zooms. You read about it. I don't like it, but thanks for having these hearings. I look forward to the witnesses. These are important bills. I will be here till about 9:30 Alaskan time, and I may have to leave. But I appreciate you having this hearing and the witnesses participating in every one of these bills should get out of the committee and on the floor, and I hope that can happen. So again, thank you for your efforts and your leadership as chairman. God bless you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Young. I understand that Ranking Member Westerman may be with us. Ranking Member Westerman, are you on? Is he not? So Ranking Member Westerman has not been able to join us today. So I would now like to introduce the witnesses for panel 1. We will transition to this first panel and welcome the members of Congress who wish to testify on the bills that they have sponsored. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. The chair now recognizes the gentleperson from Arizona, the chair of the full committee, Chair Grijalva.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and for holding this legislative hearing on the 2 pieces of legislation that I've introduced, H.R. 4881 and the Old Pasqua Community Land Acquisition, and H.R. 5221, the Urban Indian Confer Act. I know one in which you, Madam Chair, were very much involved with, and appreciate your leadership on this issue as well. H.R. 4881, the Old Pasqua Community Land Acquisition Act, will take a 30-acre parcel of land into the Pasqua Yaqui tribe reservation boundaries. In 1920, 40 acres of land were donated by A.M. Franklin for the establishment of the Yaqui Nation in Arizona. Several families moved into this new Pasqua village, now known as Old Pascua. Since 1921, this location has been a sacred ceremonial site for the tribe and holds the oldest formally established Yaqui community in Tucson, Arizona. Old Pascua refers to the oldest formally established area where the Yaqui community initially lived before their current tribal lands. Through a state negotiated compact, this legislation will provide for gaming activities in Old Pascua community. HR 4881 is a bipartisan bill that will raise the tribal standard of living, improve the system coordination and integration of service delivery, and promote the ongoing transmission of Yaqui knowledge, culture, history, and the traditions for future generations. My other bill, HR 5221, the Urban Indian Health Confer Act, will require agencies and offices within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to confer with urban Indian organizations, UIOs, on policies and initiatives related to tribal health care for urban American Indian and Alaskan Natives. Urban Indian organizations were established in response to the high number of American Indians and Alaskan Natives, 70%, living and seeking health care outside of tribal jurisdictions in cities throughout the United States. HR 5021 and Urban Confer policy at HHS will serve as the preferred method of dialogue between agencies and UIOs. HHS Urban Confer policy's limited scope serves as a barrier to UIOs and to other healthcare agencies and departments. This was highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic when it came to vaccine allocations. The current policy indicates that HHS was only obligated to initiate communications with tribal governments and other agencies, not UIOs. As a result, UIOs were prevented from providing input and delayed vaccine distribution to many urban American Indians and Alaskan Natives. HR 5221 will remedy this and codify a proper confer policy between HHS and urban Indian organizations. HR 4881, the Old Pascua Land Acquisition Act, and HR 5221, the Urban Indian Health Confer Act, are bipartisan bills to assist tribal communities. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the ranking member for having this hearing, and I send my appreciation to the witnesses and administration who will testify before us today. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Grijalva, and thank you for your leadership, especially in this moment that we are leaving on these two bills and on the addressing urban Indian healthcare. The chair will now recognize the gentleperson from Alaska, Ranking Member Young, on his bill.
This bill is very simple. It's a transfer of 11 acres to the Tana tribe. It is now public health land. The problem I see in it is they have come back with the concept that the time frame is too short. Nonsense. That's just bureaucratic nonsense. Let's transfer the land. It is going to be used for health purposes. There shouldn't be a long delay over it. And Madam Chair, if they insist upon that, I think we'll put it into the law. That it be transferred. I just think I'm very frustrated over the years. I've worked on these subjects, and there's always an excuse why it can't be done quicker. And I argue it should be done right away. So it's a very simple bill. No one opposes this bill, and I'm excited about it. I think it will work well. And by the way, the rest of these bills I also support. I mentioned that in my opening statement. I'll listen to the witnesses, but I cannot see any objection to it. There may be some suggestions from administration as usual. Regardless of administrations, but we will get forth and get these things done for the good of the Alaska Natives and American Natives. God bless you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Young, for your dedication to these issues and your direct statements about what must be done. The chair now recognizes the gentleperson from Hawaii, Mr. Kahele.
Aloha, Kakahiaka, Chair Ledger Fernandez, Chair Grijalva, Ranking Member Young, and members of the subcommittee. Mahalo nui loa for the opportunity to speak in support of the bill I've introduced, House Joint Resolution 55, the Prince Jonah Kuhio Kalaniana Ole Protecting Family Legacies Act, which would secure federal consent to a state enactment to amend the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act or the HHCA. This resolution would reduce the successorship for a Hawaiian homestead lease from 1/4 to 1/32 Hawaiian, and it aims to continue the legacy of Native Hawaiian Prince and Congressional Delegate to Congress, Jonah Kalanianaole, who originally introduced the legislation. He championed the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which was passed by Congress 100 years ago in 1921, establishing a federal land trust of over 200,000 acres to create a permanent homeland for Native Hawaiians. The Hawaiian Homes Commission Act was intended to enable Native Hawaiians to return to their lands in order to support self-sufficiency and self-determination. It was also meant to place Native Hawaiians on these lands in a prompt and efficient manner while assuring long-term tenancy to beneficiaries of the Act and their successors. Specifically, the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act provides land to Native Hawaiians in the form of 99-year leases for residential, farming, and pastoral purposes. The Act requires the original lessee to be a Native Hawaiian that is at least 18 years of age and defines Native Hawaiians as individuals who are at least 1/2 or 50% Hawaiian blood quantum. In 1959, Congress passed the Admissions Act, establishing Hawaii as the 50th state. Upon admission to the Union and as a condition of statehood, the new state of Hawaii assumed responsibility for the administration of the HHCA through a compact with the United States, enshrined in the Hawaii State Constitution. The Admissions Act authorizes the state of Hawaii to amend the HHCA, but requires consent of the United States to certain amendments that change the qualifications of homestead lessees. To be clear, the HHCA is now administered by the state of Hawaii, but retains federal oversight by requiring legislative and executive consent for certain amendments due to the conditions of the Admissions Act. The first state proposed change to the qualifications of homestead lessees was enacted in 1986, when an amendment was passed by the Hawaii State Legislature and approved by Congress, reducing the successorship qualification to 1/4 Hawaiian, 25%, for spouses and children of a lessee. Since then, several similar resolutions have been passed by the Hawaii State Legislature, signed by the governor, and subsequently approved by Congress, all by voice vote or by unanimous consent. The resolution before you today follows the same process and seeks to secure congressional consent to a recent amendment enacted by the Hawaii State Legislature in 2017 and signed by the governor of Hawaii under Act 80. The proposed amendment reduces the successorship qualification of a lessee's spouse, children, grandchildren, and brothers or sisters from 1/4 to 1/32 Hawaiian. This action was deliberated on and advanced by individual beneficiaries and collective homestead associations and deemed necessary by the state of Hawaii because many descendants of lessees currently face displacement and the loss of their ancestral homes. I now request unanimous consent to enter their support into the record. In addition to the overwhelming support from the beneficiaries that the HHCA was enacted to serve, this past session, the Hawaii State Legislature adopted a resolution formally requesting the United States Congress to consent to the 2017 amendment to reduce the successorship qualification. Native Hawaiians deserve the right to protect their ancestral homes, farms, and ranches by securing their heirship and providing for their family legacy through generational asset building. The Prince Jonah Kalanianaole Protecting Family Legacies Act perpetuates the intent of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act by ensuring long-term tenancy to the beneficiaries of this act and their successors. My resolution advances the original vision of Prince Jonah Kuhio, who fought to pass the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act in Congress 100 years ago as a non-voting delegate, and provides continuity and economic stability for many Native Hawaiians. Finally, before I close, I would like to extend my personal thanks to the co-sponsors of this bill, especially my fellow Native American Caucus leadership members, Representatives Young, Davids, Cole, LaMalfa, Joyce, Pallone, McCollum, and Mullen. Mahalo, Chair, for your time and the opportunity to speak on this very, very important resolution for the Native Hawaiian community. Aloha, and I yield back.
Mahalo, Representative Kahele. The chair would now recognize the gentleperson from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry.
Oh, thank you so much, Chairwoman Lige Fernandez and Ranking Member Young and all members of the committee. I'm so grateful to you all for your willingness to consider this bill. I think it's very important. And frankly, I'm very grateful to represent several Native American tribes in my home state of Nebraska, including the Winnebago in the northeast corner of our great state. The Winnebago land is nestled along the Missouri River bottoms at the beginning of the Great Plains in a beautiful setting of rolling hills. And this tribal territory, promised by treaty to the Winnebago people in perpetuity, has been an integral part of Nebraska's and Iowa's neighboring history and culture, and we're very proud of that. Now, several decades ago, some Winnebago land was appropriated by the Army Corps of Engineers for development. And this issue has gone back and forth in the courts. So I believe it's time to make it right, and that Congress has a special particular interest and can make this complexity whole for all the right reasons. So the Winnebago Land Transfer Act is an important bill to return to the Winnebago people this important piece of land, again, taken decades ago. Now, an issue has arisen as well as to regarding the ongoing recreational use of the land. And Madam Chair, if it's acceptable to you, I'd like to put this letter in the record from Tribal Chair Tori Kitchien, who says that hunting opportunity will continue as is on the land into the future managed by the tribe. So hunters will. Thank you very much. So hunters will continue to be able to enjoy this prime spot along the Missouri River, again, through the Winnebago Tribe Wildlife and Parks programs. So I'd really also like to acknowledge the bipartisan effort that's gone into this bill. And again, all of my colleagues who have worked very hard to make this situation right. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Fortenberry. I'd like to thank all of my colleagues for describing the nature of their bills and the importance of passing them. I'd like now to transition to our second panel of witnesses for today. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. When you begin, the on-screen timer will begin counting down and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I recommend that members and witnesses joining remotely lock the timer on their screen. When you go over the allotted time, I will gently ask you to wrap up your statement. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any advertent background noise. I will allow the entire panel to testify before we question the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Mr. P. Benjamin Smith, who is the Deputy Director for the Intergovernmental Affairs for the Indian Health Service.
Good afternoon, good morning, Chair Ledger Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, and the members of this subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the bills HR 441 and HR 5221. Starting with HR 441, this bill would convey certain land in Tana, Nebraska to the Tana Tribal Council by warranty deed. The bill requires the conveyance of the property be completed within 180 days of enactment. Additional time is needed to convey the property in order to complete ongoing environmental remediation prior to the transfer. The Indian Health Service recommends that the time for conveyance of the property be changed to 2 years from the date of enactment. The bill would also free the Tana Tribal Council of any liability that it would otherwise have for environmental contamination that may have occurred before the date of the transfer, including the period when the Tana Tribal Council has been managing the property. In 1995, the Tana Tribal Council assumed management of the property with responsibility for the provision of the Indian Health Service funded healthcare services under the authority of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. The Indian Health Service recommends that the environmental liability clause in the bill be revised as noted in the written testimony. With these concerns in mind, the Department of Health and Human Services supports the purposes of the bill to convey the property to the Tana Tribal Council in order to facilitate providing improved health services to Alaska Natives. Turning now to HR 5221, this bill would amend the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act to establish an urban Indian organization confer policy for the Department of Health and Human Services. The bill would require the department to ensure its agencies and offices confer with urban Indian organizations in carrying out laws relating to Indian healthcare. An integral component of the government-to-government relationship is our commitment to regular and meaningful consultation with federally recognized Indian tribes. The Department of Health and Human Services takes its responsibility to consult with tribal governments seriously and first established the department's tribal consultation policy in 1997. The policy specifically recognizes the unique political status of tribal governments. Additionally, the government-to-government relationship with Indian tribes is affirmed through this policy. The Indian Health Service developed its tribal consultation policy in consultation with Indian tribes. Last updated on January 18th, 2006, the policy outlines that consultation with Indian tribes will occur to the extent practicable and permitted by law before any action is taken that will significantly affect Indian tribes. Other statutes and policies exist that allow for federal consultation with Indian organizations and confer with urban Indian organizations that, by the nature of their business, serve Indian people and might be affected if excluded from the consultation and confer process. As part of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, Congress reauthorized and amended the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act and added a requirement that the Indian Health Service confer to the maximum extent practicable with urban Indian organizations in carrying out the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. In 2014, the Indian Health Service established the policy on conferring with urban Indian organizations. The policy serves as a guide when the agency seeks input from Indian organization leaders on urban Indian health matters. This policy strives to ensure that Indian health care needs are considered at every level, local, area, and national levels when implementing and carrying out the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. The Indian Health Service confer policy has been used since its implementation to ensure the highest possible health status for urban Indians. The Indian Health Service is the only agency within the federal government to implement this formal process, and it is a best practice and critical partnership opportunity. The Indian Health Service has consistently heard from Indian organizations that they would like the opportunity to confer with other divisions within the Department of Health and Human Services. They have also expressed that the need to confer with other divisions is even more critical due to the pandemic and the need for interagency collaboration. The Indian Health Service conferring process works to ensure that the healthcare priorities of urban Indian populations are being heard and addressed at the local, area, and national levels. We look forward to continuing our work with Congress on these bills and welcome the opportunity to provide technical assistance as requested by the subcommittee or its members. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Daryl LaCointe, who is the director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Ledger Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Daryl LaCointe, and I am the director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs at the Department of the Interior. Thank you for the opportunity to present testimony regarding HR 4881, the Old Pasqua Community Land Acquisition Act, and HR 2402, the Winnebago Land Transfer Act of 2021. Taking land into trust is one of the most important functions the department undertakes on behalf of tribes. The department recognizes that acquiring trust lands is central to strengthening tribal sovereignty and self-determination. Both HR 4881 and HR 2402 align with the department's priorities, transferring land into trust for the Pasqua Yaqui tribe and the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. Pasqua Yaqui tribe is located in Pima County, Arizona. The tribe currently possesses a combination of lands held in trust by the United States and land it purchased in fee. On May 24, 2021, the Department of the Interior approved the Pasqua Yaqui tribe State of Arizona and Restated Compact. One of the principal functions of the compact is to identify the specific areas and regions within the state wherein the tribe may conduct gaming activities. Such activities are authorized under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act and as a part of the compact negotiation agreed to by both the tribe and the state of Arizona. This area in the context of HR 4881 is referred to as Compact Designated Area, which includes the area south of West Grant Road, east of Interstate 10, north of West Aliento, and west of North 15th Avenue in the city of Tucson, Arizona. H.R. 4881 directs the Secretary of the Interior to take the land into trust within the compact designated area at the request of the Pascua Yaqui tribe. Any such lands placed into trust shall be a part of the Pascua Yaqui Reservation, shall be deemed to have been acquired into trust on September 18, 1978, and shall be administered in accordance with the laws and regulations generally applicable to lands held in trust by the United States for an Indian tribe. The Department of the Interior supports H.R. 4881. This bill provides greater opportunity for the Pascua Yaqui tribe to make investments in the tribal economy, promote community and regional economic development within the greater Tucson region, and is in keeping with the Biden administration's commitment to support tribal self-determination, including economic self-determination. H.R. 2402, the Winnebago Land Transfer Act of 2021, is a bill that would transfer administrative jurisdiction of certain federal lands from the Army Corps of Engineers to the Bureau of Indian Affairs to take such lands into trust for the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. H.R. 2402 would apply to lands on the east side of the Missouri River, specifically a portion of tract number 119, all of tract 210, and all of tract 113, located within Woodbury County and Monona County, Iowa. The Winnebago Reservation was established by the Treaty of March 8, 1865, in exchange for a cession of the tribe's lands in the Dakota Territory. The Treaty of 1865 designated that Winnebago Reservation would be set apart for the occupation and future home of the Winnebago Indians forever. However, in the 1970s, the tracts identified in H.R. 2402 were acquired by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers through an erroneous condemnation action in eminent domain. H.R. 2402 would rightfully restore the Winnebago Reservation boundaries insofar as the tracts identified are concerned, and would be in keeping with the United States' promise to the Winnebago tribe in the Treaty of March 8, 1865. Interior supports H.R. 2402. This bill is in line with the administration's commitment to honor treaty rights, respect tribal sovereignty, and support the right of tribal governments to acquire land in trust in furtherance of their self-determination. In conclusion, Chair Ledger Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. The Department of the Interior expresses support for these two bills. The department is grateful to work with the subcommittee to support more prosperous Indian country and honor the treaty rights and commitments of the federal government to the indigenous people of this land. I would be honored to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. LeCount. I want to thank the second panel of witnesses for their testimonies. I want to remind the members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Thank you, Deputy Director Smith and Director LeCount, for that informative testimony. We do truly appreciate hearing the position of the administration. So, Deputy Director Smith, I appreciated your statement about the long history and the role that you are playing regarding consultation. But we're also talking today that we do not want to supplant tribal consultation. Would you elaborate further on the Indian Health Service's existing Confer policy with urban Indian organizations and explain why it's valuable in addition to the tribal consultation reaffirmed by the Biden administration and required by all federal agencies?
Thank you, Chair Ledger Fernandez, for the question. And I guess pointing back to the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, amendments of 2010, when Congress added a requirement that the Indian Health Service confer to the maximum extent practicable whenever a critical event or issue as defined in our policy, which we instituted in 2014, arises, really helps frame the process around conferring with urban Indian organizations, or falls in line with the Indian Health policy objectives to conference with urban Indian organizations in fulfilling the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. A little different from tribal consultation, the law does define confer, which means engagement in open and free exchange of information and opinions, leading to mutual understanding and comprehension and emphasizing trust, respect, and shared responsibility. I think these principles really align well with the goals of tribal consultation as outlined in executive orders and subsequent presidential memoranda to really emphasize the process of communication when critical events occur. One thing that you will find in our policy is a definition of critical events. It could be a change of law, it could be additional funding, or an issue that an urban Indian organization may encounter where they need to bring that to the attention of the agency.
If I may, on that issue about an event, I am curious. We heard about the concerns of how the urban facilities did not respond as quickly as the IHS facilities on tribal lands with regards to the vaccination. Great work, I believe, on many of the IHS facilities here in New Mexico, getting vaccination. But do you think a formal confer policy with HHS, with the total of HHS, would have avoided or mitigated some of the issues that arose during the COVID-19 pandemic, and recognizing that that was indeed a critical event?
Thank you for the question. Certainly, whenever there's a possibility for clarification in law, we would certainly welcome an opportunity to provide technical assistance to that. With the Indian Health Services policy on conferring with urban Indian organizations, we did have an opportunity to spot the potential impact that decisions could have on urban Indian organizations. So on our side, we did have the opportunity to reach out to other federal agencies that within the Department of Health and Human Services to share some of the concerns and opportunities to include urban Indian organizations in the activities that you're mentioning. But certainly if a similar requirement was extended to other federal agencies, the outcome may have been a little different. But I would be hesitant to speculate. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to now ask Director LeConte, you noted in your testimony that the land transfer bills are fundamentally important to tribal sovereignty and economic sovereignty. And I know why this is very important and understand that. I'm going to ask a question that goes a little bit beyond the scope of today's legislation and ask whether you believe there are ways in which we can improve or streamline the BIA land into trust process to alleviate obstacles with the administrative transfer of land. If you could address that.
Thank you for the opportunity to address that. And I'd also like to thank IHS for my vaccination. Yes, there are ways, and we work on them constantly. Many years ago, I believe in 2010, I was put in charge of streamlining the fee to trust process, the land into trust process. And what had happened through the years, we had got so far away from written regulations because of certain legal matters here and there, and our solicitors had different rules in different locations, and it's been an ongoing effort for the past 11 years to do exactly that. And I am going to reinforce that with all of my senior executives this week on our Thursday monthly call. And yes, we can do that. Any help we get from Congress makes the process much easier. Mandatory acquisitions, when Congress says thou shalt, makes the process much smoother, much quicker. I will add that. Does that answer your question, Chair?
Yes. Yes, it does. I mean, and I think that it is important, especially with the two bills today. We've heard such strong testimony about why they're important, but also in order to, we have the policy that allows it to happen at the BIA level, and we shouldn't always need the act of Congress to move these forward. With that, I believe the timer is a little off. I'm going to yield back and move on and ask Ranking Member Young for questions of the panel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Smith, I noticed that you somewhat paid attention to my comments about time. I've passed 3 other bills in my last 10 years. And it took how many days to take the IHS to finalize a respective transfer for each one was signed into law? How many days and how much time did it take and why?
Thank you, Ranking Member Young, for the question. Certainly, once all of the laws and regulations are met, the Indian Health Service and the Tribal Health Program can complete the transfer of real property for land via quitclaim deed or warranty if authorized by Congress in approximately 60 to 90 days. However, one thing that we do note is that there are several laws and regulations that come into play. In particular, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, and National Historic Preservation Act that may influence major actions for real property land transfers. And this may require years to complete the requirements, such as the environmental remediation of soil and underground water. And so, as mentioned, we do support the bill, but we are concerned about meeting these requirements within the timeframe.
Well, with that length of time, how do you think, why does Tana know about it? It's not in Indiana, that was the fall of mine. It's early in Alaska, but why do you think they require the land and this delay will do what? The healthcare. I'm very frustrated. I've been in this business 50 years and I listen to people like yourselves. We can't do it because, it's another agency and the people who are supposed to be served aren't being served. So they want it for healthcare purposes, what's to keep you from transferring that land to them with the stipulations? If there's some of the other things that other agencies, that it doesn't stop them going forward to the healthcare. That might be 10 years from now.
Thank you for the follow-up question. Indeed, we do want to underscore that there is no direct negative impact on the healthcare, as the Tana Tribal Council is currently using the Indian Healthcare Facility and land under their current Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act contract and annual funding agreement with the Indian Health Service. However, without a direct ownership via warranty deed, the Tana Tribal Council may not be able to receive a loan to fund and construct new buildings on the site to improve or expand healthcare services.
Well, and again, that goes back to what I said. By not doing it quickly, you're delaying their providing services to their recipients. And this is just government nonsense. And Madam Chair, again, I say I want the staff to look at this and see how we can do this much quicker. I do not like other agencies interfering in what we're trying to do. I see this all the time. Well, you can't do it because we got to clear with Fish and Wildlife, EPA, Coastal Guard, Corps of Engineers. In the meantime, the tribe is being punished by inactivity of the federal government. I want your support, Mr. Smith, to make sure we do this very rapidly. And there's no reason why we can't do it. It's just pure Washington, D.C. gobbledygook. In the meantime, the people in Tana are trying to serve their people are now being said, well, we might be able to do it when we can't do it. I have the witnesses later on, and I'll ask her. But somewhere we're going to get this problem solved. I've seen it time and time and time again. Keeps you employed, but it's not the correct way to serve my constituents. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Young. The chair would now recognize Chairman Grijalva for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Director LeCount, thank you very much for your comments on HR 4881. And Deputy Director Smith, a couple of questions on 5221. Considering that there's no real formal urban confer policy no formal active outside of IHS, how have other HHS divisions impacted UIOs in your experience?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the question. You're drawing back to the experience that we have through tribal consultation really set a framework for the Indian Health Service to quickly implement the changes to the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act with regard to developing a policy on conferring with urban Indian organizations. And likewise, we have been able to amplify and share best practices throughout the department, within the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as beyond the department to other federal agencies. How this is assisting, we have a number of examples where it helped to identify proposed new or existing health policies and programs that qualify as critical events or issues arising in implementing or carrying out the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, conferring with urban Indian organizations is required.
So what, if I may, Deputy Director, what must IHS do when another agency wants to initiate discussion, confer with UIOs? What do they need to do, and does that put any strain on your resources?
Thank you for the question. We believe we're one of federal government, and as such, the Indian Health Service has certainly stepped in to assist federal agencies. An example that comes to mind is our work with the Department of Veterans Affairs with the recent changes to law that now extend to urban Indian organizations, as an example.
Are other agencies able to accomplish this conferring and collaborating with UIOs without involving IHS?
Thank you for the question. Certainly, there's nothing preventing them from developing a policy similar to the Indian Health Service. However, in providing a technical assistance to Congress, we do point out that the requirement in the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act only extends to the Indian Health Service at this time.
Okay, and the last thing, you know, the lack of a department-wide, not just IHS, department-wide urban confer policy in HHS. How did the coordination, the one that's in front of us, the vaccination distribution in UIOs, how long did let's compare tribal communities. How long did tribal communities with urban Indian populations, UIOs, have to wait for the vaccine distribution as opposed to the jurisdiction of a tribal government or community? What was the rate difference?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Initially, urban Indian organizations were not included in the discussion and request from the Department of Health and Human Services about whether urban Indian organizations would receive their vaccine allocation from the state or from the Indian Health Service. As a result, it was unclear to urban Indian organizations on whether they were expected to make a similar decision as tribes did. It was ultimately determined that the urban Indian organizations could select a state or Indian Health Service for their vaccine allocation. And some urban Indian organizations, however, get delays in the initial vaccine rollout.
Codifying a general policy for the agency as a whole, not just IHS, is that a benefit in the short term and the long term in terms of the conferring and collaboration with UIOs?
As a unique form of communication, similar to what we learned through tribal consultation, we believe the policy can be improved over time. And currently, we are right in the midst of updating our policy on conferring with urban Indian organizations.
And so at this point, there is no support for the codification of this into law from IHS or from the department, from HHS?
Certainly, the department's committed, including the Indian Health Service, committed to fulfilling the Indian health policy goals as outlined in the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, which does speak to consultation and conference with urban Indian organizations.
Okay, and I'll take that as a resounding yes, sir. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Chair Grijalva. The chair will now recognize Representative Radaragan for 5 minutes.
Talofa lava. Welcome to the panelists, and thank you, Chairwoman Ledger Fernandez and Ranking Member Young for holding this hearing today. I also want to thank Congressman Kahele for his work on HJ Res 55, of which I am a proud co-sponsor. I just want to take a moment to talk about today's legislation and highlight HJ Res 55 in particular. As a Pacific Islander, I have a strong personal stake in advocating for a strong relationship between the federal government and the local island people. We were here before we worked out our various deals with the United States. And if we take the right attitude, we'll be here long into the future. The goal of today's hearing and every SCIP hearing we hold is to protect and uphold the traditions and livelihoods of our Indigenous peoples. I'd argue the United States remains the greatest country on earth, but it only does so by celebrating and respecting the myriad cultures that make up our nation and by paying special care to preserving the traditions of those who came before us. This isn't just about protecting a few special interest groups. Indigenous peoples are Americans, and our well-being allows us to continue to contribute that richness of culture and strength, which benefits the whole country. HJ Res 55 exemplifies this relationship between the U.S. and its people, and I thank Representative Kahele and this committee again for their work on this. Mr. LeCount, I didn't see any mention in your written testimony, but does the administration have an official position on HJ Res 55? And more generally, how do you approach efforts by Indigenous peoples to preserve property rights through blood quantum limits and/or family lines?
Thank you for the question. I am not prepared to speak to 55. I apologize. I was not briefed on it. I was briefed on the two bills that I have. As the director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, I have been around 33 years, and tribes, Indigenous people are responsible for their own enrollments, and many of them utilize blood quantum for that. So I'm very familiar with it. My particular tribe, the Turtle Mountain Band of the Chippewa Indians, is 1/4 blood quantum, but you'll see it as low as a 32nd, and you'll see it as high as a half, depending upon the tribe. They get to make their own choices, and I hope that comes somewhat close to answering your question.
Yes. Thank you, Chairwoman Ledger Fernandez. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Radaragan. The chair would now recognize Representative Soto, the gentleperson from Florida.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. It's time that this committee recognizes that Native Americans are on the move through military, commerce, arts and sciences, sports, and many other contributions that frequently brings many of our Native Americans to our cities from time to time, and many others call cities their home. Most tribal lands are rural, but not all of them. The Seminole tribe has locations in Fort Lauderdale, and it is an example of urban tribes in my home state of Florida. It's time to modernize and improve health access for our Native Americans. This requires us to have greater urban access through the Indian Health Service and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is why we applaud Chair Grijalva for this great bill. It'd be great to hear from both first Mr. LeCount, then from Mr. Smith, on the rise of urban tribes, as well as describing these Native American tribe urban relocations, and why it's critical to boost both urban health coordination and resources. Again, we'll start with Mr. LeCun.
Thank you. Why it's important in my mind is the last numbers that I saw were that approximately 70% of enrolled Native Americans live off reservation and in urban areas. And I think it's vitally important that those people are served. I had a previous assistant secretary express his frustration to me one day that we were only serving 30% of the Indian population. I'd say we serve more than that, but that's the lay of the land. There's the last numbers I saw were 70% are in these urban areas.
Thank you so much. 70% is certainly a large number. It's not surprising because we have a lot of movement among all Americans, including Native Americans, but it does show the need for the bill. Mr. Smith, it'd be great to get your take on the rise of urban tribes and relocations and the importance of urban health coordination between your agency and HHS.
Thank you, Representative Soto, for the question. I would like to first clarify that we do acknowledge as a federal agency, the unique government to government and political relationship we have with each Indian tribe across the country. We also do acknowledge that there are many members of federally recognized tribes that reside in urban areas. I'm an example of one. I'm a member and citizen of the Navajo Nation that resides here in the Washington, D.C. area. But urban Indian organizations are a major provider of healthcare to urban American Indians and Alaska Natives across the country. Pointing back to the enactment of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act in 1976, urban Indian organizations and definitions of the urban settings were clearly outlined and defined as a need of focus and inclusion in carrying out the National Indian Health Policy goals. So it is extremely important to understand how members of American Indians and Alaska Natives that are residing in urban settings have access to healthcare services as outlined in this important piece of legislation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Smith. I'll be talking a little bit more about it in the next panel, but proud to work with Representative Fortenberry on HR 2402 related to transferring ancestral lands back to the Winnebago tribe. Very excited that that bill is coming up here today, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Soto. The chair would now recognize the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranker Young, for putting this hearing together today for us. I appreciate both of you taking the work to do that. Mr. Smith, in your written statement to the hearing record, you alluded to the Executive Order 13175, which, as you put it, affirms the importance of tribal consultation. The executive order requires each agency, and in quotes, have an accountable process to ensure meaningful and timely input by tribal officials in the development of regulatory policies that have tribal implications. Can you describe for me the current process that HHS has in place requiring the consultation with the tribes?
Absolutely. So dating back to 1997, the Department of Health and Human Services and the Indian Service implemented their first policies on tribal consultation. As mentioned in the Executive Order 13175, this really set a standard across government to adopt policies for consulting with Indian tribes on some of the items that you just mentioned. Further, as we find through legislation, the Indian Health Service is a prime example where we have a requirement to annually consult with tribes and seek their participation in our annual budget formulation. That piece of legislation is in the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. But as we've worked since the late 90s, we have updated our policy a handful of times. And currently, we're in the midst of consulting on updating our 2006 policy. The Department of Health and Human Services has done similar policy efforts to improve the communications in the way that we are implementing Executive Order 13175 to ensure that we're better defining what a critical event may be, whether it's an appropriation act, whether it's supplemental appropriations as we've experienced throughout this pandemic, or a significant change to law that will impact Indian tribes. Our policies outline our process for tribal consultation, and we are happy to provide additional technical support or technical assistance to help you understand the levels of consultation.
So what I'm trying to get at is establishing what the process looks like now, and how you feel that 5221 is going to benefit the areas that it's going to benefit this consultation and collaboration moving forward. What barriers is it going to get out of the way? And if you could give me a little bit of feedback on what that process has been like, that exchange previously, and when we implement 5221, where those specific barriers and problems are that it's going to address.
Absolutely. So with this bill, fortunately, we do have the experience through tribal consultation. And just in a quick summary, a critical event, whether it's a change in law, a change in policy, that really triggers the tribal consultation. The next step is announcing. We usually notify tribal leaders or urban Indian organization leaders by a letter announcing the critical event. Next step is to gather input. We need to determine how we're going to seek the needed input that's going to lead to a decision. The decision making is incumbent upon the federal government to carry out. But most importantly, when the government does make that decision, reporting back to tribal leaders and urban Indian organization leaders is equally important. So we do have the framework in place that follows a step and process for tribal consultation that we have adopted for urban Confer, and we believe this could be easily replicated throughout government.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I would yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. The chair would now recognize Representative Case, the gentleperson from Hawaii.
Good morning and aloha, Madam Chair, members, witnesses. First of all, I note, as well as Ms. Radewagen, that I'm a very proud co-sponsor of HJ Res 55 with Congressman Kahele, strong supporter of this, and I'll get into that a little bit with my questioning later. I also, Madam Chair, want to thank you personally in front of this committee for taking time out of your precious personal family vacation time recently to understand Native Hawaiians generally back in our home state, as well as the Hawaiian homelands. Your visit to the Keaukaha Hawaiian homelands to appreciate personally the vision and the reality of the Hawaiian homelands on the ground meant everything to Congressman Kahele and me, and everything to Hawaiian homeland folks throughout the country. That was really a nice gesture, so thank you for that. Mr. Smith, last year we dealt with the question of the participation of Native Hawaiians in certain programs and protections under the urban Indian organizations. The specific question was on a bill by Mr. Gallego having to do with coverage of urban Indian organizations under the Federal Tort Claims Act. That bill was eventually passed very early this year. However, the question was whether Native Hawaiians should be covered and get the same tort coverage as they are and remain integrally part of the urban Indian organization, although they're not technically part of the Indian Health Service. They contract for services when folks that are eligible under the Indian Health Service, for example, are in Hawaii. Those are Native Hawaiian healthcare organizations that provide those services, and yet they do not have that coverage. And so that was a matter of debate. At the time, Director Weaki testified in this committee that he would support the inclusion of Native Hawaiians. So that's unfinished business. But I mention it as a prelude to my question, which is, in your view, what consultation under HR 5221 or otherwise would be owed, would be appropriate for other Indigenous peoples who are not directly in the urban Indian or the Indian Healthcare Service when they are not specifically eligible? Do you have a comment on Native Hawaiians in particular?
Thank you very much, Representative Case, for the question and comment. And certainly this is an area that we are tracking closely and stand ready to provide technical assistance on if and when requested. But certainly, as it comes to tribal consultation, we stand ready to share our experience on some of the critical events that have played out throughout our history as a federal agency in working with tribal governments as a form of communication that emphasizes trust, respect, shared responsibility, working towards mutual decision making if possible. If and when possible, we certainly believe this is a policy that has benefited American Indian and Alaska Native tribes, and would certainly be willing to share our experience with Native Hawaiians.
Well,
excuse me,
Mr. Smith, I think my question is a little bit more direct than sharing it. My question has to do with, do you undertake any consultation obligation, or do you think it's a good idea to consult with Native Hawaiian organizations when Native Hawaiians are providing services in a culturally appropriate way to other Indigenous peoples under the Indian Health Service?
Certainly, we'd be welcome to conversations and any impact that may impact tribes or their members. And certainly, if there's an opportunity to elevate some of those impacts to tribal leadership, we would certainly assist in serving as a conduit for those conversations.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I do support this bill, by the way. I just want to make sure that Native Hawaiians are recognized as part of the penumbra of these services, whether they technically, formally are covered or not right now. Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Representative Case. The chair would now recognize the gentleperson from Oregon, Representative Benz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to have a little trouble with my video here. Very, very interesting conversations. I appreciate the opportunity to learn more about all aspects of the issues before us. But I really don't have any questions at this point, so I'll yield back. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Benz, for attending the hearing and sharing the education that we all are encountering today. The chair will now recognize the vice chair of the full committee, Representative Garcia from the great state of Illinois.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, and to the witnesses joining us today. Even before the pandemic, we've known that resources within the Indian health system were stretched thin. Urban Indian health centers, in particular, play a critical role in providing health care to Indigenous communities and remain on the front lines during the pandemic, all of which they do while dealing with longstanding parity issues within the Indian health system, supply shortages, closures, and financial hardships. We cannot afford to leave urban natives without access to adequate care during this public health crisis, especially. Mr. Smith, can you speak on the impact that COVID-19 has specifically had on the urban Indian communities?
Thank you very much, Representative Garcia, for the question. And I think as a starting point, I don't think there's anybody in this country who is immune to the impact of COVID-19, whether it's myself, tribal leaders, my neighbor. This really impacted everybody as a country within our country. However, what I can share is that through our tools of tribal consultation and urban confer at the Indian Health Service, we had the ability to gather input in a very expeditious, short-term manner to make some important decisions, whether they're related to funding or if they're related to developing tools to help bridge some of the questions related to accessing supplies, staffing shortages, or just to raise issues that come quickly. At the Indian Health Service, we were able to stand up what we call our incident command system structure, where during the height of the pandemic, we were holding daily meetings to be able to raise issues up the chain all the way to the White House level. And this communication and magnification of issues as they are encountered daily really made a difference in developing some of the tools that we have now available on our website. We're working with other federal agencies such as FEMA or the Department of the Interior. I truly believe that these policies that we have in place really created the framework for us to have those important and needed conversations. But in a nutshell, every facility, whether it's a tribal health program, an Indian Health Service facility, or an urban Indian organization, were impacted by the pandemic in one manner or another.
In your testimony, you describe that urban Indian organizations have expressed that and I quote, need to confer with other HHS divisions is even more critical due to the pandemic and need for interagency collaboration. Why is there now an even greater need for UIOS to confer with HHS and not just the Indian Health Service? And be mindful, you've got about a minute and 20.
Yes, absolutely. I'll be brief. Again, pointing to our tribal consultation experience, the department as a whole has a policy which applies to every operating division on how we consult with Indian tribal governments. Having similar that expresses or extends that to urban Indian organizations would level set the conversations. In addition, we were talking about the Executive Order 13175, which really extended the tribal consultation across government. So there is opportunities to enhance interagency collaboration through an expansion of the policy.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm running out of time, so I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Garcia. The chair would now recognize the gentleman from California, Representative Obernolte, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a question for Mr. LeCount, just to piggyback on what Congresswoman Raderwagen was asking about. And I appreciate the fact that that she was asking about H.J. Res 55, and that wasn't part of your testimony, but I just have to express respectfully a little bit of frustration here. You're the director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and so we have 5 bills here that relate to Indian affairs, and I think that you have some critical expertise there that I'd like to tunnel down on. So, piggybacking on that, so the bill is proposing to change these blood quantum requirements. And as you said, right now, in most matters related to the tribes, we rely on the tribes themselves to determine what their membership is. We don't impose a blood quantum requirement on it. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about an action taken by Congress to further this blood quantum requirement, and whether or not there's some operational difficulties for the BIA in that.
I thank you for the opportunity. I don't think that there would be significant issues with the Bureau implementing something like that. We've been around it a long time, and it's changed through the years. And we do our best to respect the tribes in their efforts to identify who their members are. And we try not to get too nosy, but we want to know how many they are. We want to know each tribe, how many are in there, as obviously the pandemic showed us how important that was, because a lot of the funds that Congress allocated for tribes was based upon populations. So we do our best to have as much information on hand as possible. And it would be a matter of consulting with tribes again, because sometimes they don't think it's our business to know these things. But I don't think that we would be too shook up if we had to do something like that. We do our best to know who they are now. So thank you for the question.
Right. Oh, okay. And follow up there. So we're proposing lowering the blood quantum requirement to 1/32. But it just kind of begs the question, if we're going to be back here in 10 years or 20 years talking about 1/64 or 128th, right? And it's just converging on something that's meaningless. And I'm wondering if it just makes more sense and is more respectful to the tribes to, rather than having Congress imposing blood quantum requirements on them, to instead let them define their membership based on the integrity of their culture. What do you think about that idea?
I think that that's what's occurring now, sir. There are tribes, most notably the Great Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, that essentially recognizes lineal descendants of a role that was accounted for way back in the early 1900s. If you can prove that you are a lineal descendant of that, you are a member of their nation. And there are several other tribes that are like that, and we're very respectful of it. They get to identify who they are, and so it's not unprecedented to, as you can say, go to 1/64th, 128th, because there are, again, lineal descendant enrollment things out there now.
Great. Well, fascinating. Maybe that's something we'll look at in the future, but thank you very much for the testimony. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Obernolte. The chair would now recognize the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Representative Stansbury, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you so much for convening today's hearing, and thank you to the administration and everyone who's come to testify on these bills today. As you all know, and as we've been discussing this morning, our urban Indian organizations are vital to serving the healthcare needs of our tribal communities across the country, and especially here in my home state of New Mexico. New Mexico is home to 23 sovereign tribes and pueblos and nearly 250,000 indigenous individuals, including over 40,000 living in my district alone, which largely includes the urban areas around Albuquerque. First Nations Community Health Source in my district is a member of the National Council of Urban Indian Health and is the sole urban Indian health center in the state of New Mexico. First Nations offers healthcare, including primary care, dental, and behavioral health services to eligible individuals at no cost in the Albuquerque area. And I want to take a moment to shout out and lift up their incredible work and that of our frontline healthcare workers who have been working day in and day out over the last several months as we've been facing this difficult pandemic. This is why I am so proud to co-sponsor and urge passage of HR 5221 to require our Health and Human Services Department to confer with urban Indian organizations before major decisions are made. HR 5221 will ensure that HHS keeps adequate lines of communication open with urban Indian organizations to ensure that healthcare needs of our communities can be met. The lack of a standing Confer policy from the Department of Health and Human Services and its delay in vaccine rollout for urban Native communities is absolutely unacceptable. Healthcare is a human right, and the federal government has a trust, treaty, and moral obligations to ensure our tribal communities have access to care. In this instance, the federal government neglected to fulfill its obligations, And it's critical that we address and institutionalize these policies going forward. First Nations and all urban Indian organizations have worked tirelessly throughout the pandemic to serve our communities and would greatly benefit from this legislation. The health and well-being of our tribal communities has been neglected for far too long, and it is our responsibility to ensure that we are meeting the needs of our communities. So I look forward to working with my fellow New Mexican Chairwoman Representative Leger Fernandez and with Chairman Grijalva, and thank him for bringing this legislation forward. And I'd like to ask a question briefly of Deputy Director Smith. And thank you, Mr. Smith, for being here with us today. And thank you also for serving. It's a difficult job. As we all know, this pandemic has brought so much loss and hardship to our communities. Here in New Mexico, our tribes and our pueblos have been leaders in vaccination efforts, and in many cases have 90+% vaccination rates. But here in Albuquerque, in my home district, we have a number of instances in which individuals were delayed in being able to access vaccines through the Indian Health Service and clinics. So I know we've talked a lot about it this morning, but could you please take a moment to help us really understand why there was this delay in vaccine rollout to the UIOs, and what specific steps, besides some of the policies that you've described already, HHS is taking to make sure that this does not happen again?
Thank you, Representative Stansbury, for the comments and questions. Certainly, we believe that this is a all-of-government approach, including our state partners, as well as local government officials as well. Identifying the problems is always key. I think addressing the issues through our incident command system structure really helped bring to light some of the challenges that were being faced throughout the country locally. As I mentioned earlier, right now the requirement to confer with urban Indian organizations is only extended to the Indian Health Service. So what this means is other divisions across government relied on Indian Health Service to initiate urban confer efforts. With the policy, we sought input as quickly as possible and tried to develop the needed gaps for information. We were able to work through some of the supply issues, but to your specific question about New Mexico, I will have to take that back to the agency and do a little bit additional research on that, but would appreciate to follow up with you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I really appreciate that and look forward to the follow-up. And again, thank you for serving, and very much look forward to seeing this legislation pass and ensuring that we institutionalize this confer policy, not just at IHS, but throughout HHS and through other federal agencies that may be working with clinics and nonprofit organizations serving these populations. So very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Stansbury. I do want to thank the administrative panel for answering our questions. And the members of the committee, as you know, may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. I'm going to now turn to the third and final panel of witnesses for their testimony. Before introducing them, I'll remind non-administration witnesses that they are encouraged to participate in the Witness Diversity Survey created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. As with previous panels, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be part of the hearing record and has been reviewed by the members of the committee. When you begin, the on-screen timer will begin counting down and will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I recommend that members and witnesses joining remotely lock the timer on this screen. When you go over the allotted time, I will gently ask you to please wrap up your statement. After your testimony is complete, remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I will allow the entire panel to testify before we question the witnesses. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Peter Yucapicio, who is the chairman of the Pascua Yaqui tribe. Chairman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Liosum Chaniabo. Buenos dias. On behalf of our ancestors, our tribal members, our elders, it is a great day today to address this committee. Madam Chairwoman, I am the chairman of the Pasco Yaqui Tribe. My name is Peter Yucapicio. I ask for your support to pass HR 4881, the Old Pasco Community Land Acquisition Act. Under the HR 4881, the Department of Interior would take certain parcels of tribally owned fee land located in the historic tribal community of Old Pasco into trust for the benefit of the tribes. The legislation would protect one of our most sacred and cultural sites while also providing great economic benefit for the tribe, for the surrounding community, and in the form of millions of dollars of investment and creation of hundreds, if not thousands, of new jobs. The legislation also implements a provision in our federally approved compact with the state of Arizona and is consistent with an intertribal government agreement with the city of Tucson. Finally, it begins the fulfillment of the congressional promises to support the expansion of the tribe's land base. In the late 19th and 20th century, numerous Yaqui communities were established in and around Old Pasco. Since 1921, the Old Pasco Cultural Plaza Church has served as the oldest formally established Yaqui community in Tucson. For generations, Yaquis have gathered at the Old Pasco Cultural Plaza to hold ceremonies, including processionals. The Cultural Plaza is owned by the tribe and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as a traditional cultural property. Protecting this land for all time by putting it into trust is of the utmost importance to the tribe. The tribe has spent the last several years in extraordinarily successful discussions with the state regarding a gaming compact that expressly provides for land at the Old Pasco to be the site of a third casino. The compact was entered into by the state and 20 Arizona tribes and then approved by the federal government, expressly provides for the compact designated area. Essentially, the land in Old Pasco where the tribe can establish a third casino after Congress approves taking the land into trust. In parallel with the negotiation of the compact, the tribe and the city of Tucson executed an intergovernmental agreement for the land that expressly covers taxation, jurisdiction, municipal services like trash, water, and electricity, and tribal payments in lieu of taxes. The project's operation will create approximately 500 total direct jobs. It will also generate approximately about 17 million in direct wages and in the city and the county, and spending in the range of 12 to 12.5 million in vendor spending in the city and the county. Another yet positive economic impact will be the increase in wages in the region, an increase in tax revenues to the state and local governments, and additional revenues to the city of Tucson through our IGA. The new property will pay annual taxes of approximately 8.3 million, including gaming distributions to the state, payroll taxes, and sales taxes. A land study has determined that the existing land base of our 22,000 member tribe is inadequate for the establishment of the diverse economic base and basic housing need. The acquisition of the Old Pasco land into trust would partially fulfill this congressional initiative while facilitating tribal self-determination, economic development, and housing. On behalf of my nation, I want to thank you for your time. We have a long and positive relationship with the committee that we pray continues to grow and remains prosperous. As we say back home here in Chimampotawak, it's in your hands to help us out and help this committee here in the city of Tucson. Leos Impo Enchim. May God be with you. Thank you very much, committee members, Madam Chair. May the blessings of our people to you today and forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Yucapicio, for your testimony and your blessings. The chair now recognizes the Honorable William J. Aila, Jr., who is the chairman of the Hawaiian Homes Commission.
Hi, good morning, Chair Fernandez, Ranking Member Don Young, introducer of HR 55, Representative Kahele, and Representative Case, aloha, good morning, aloha kakahiaka. Representative Case, a longtime supporter of Native Hawaiian and natural resource issues. I would like to speak toward the Prince Jonah Kohio Kalani Anaoli Protecting Family Legacies Act, first by making a few points and then by addressing some of the highlights of the testimony. So with your indulgence, the program itself, as adopted in 1921, is extremely important to Native Hawaiians as defined by the Act. Some Native Hawaiian is defined as someone who is 50% of the blood or more. And here we are 4 or 5 generations later, as pointed out by several representatives, and the blood quantum is, for no particular reason, starting to be reduced. So the program has nearly 10,000 leases across the state of Hawaii. Its original intent and the continued intent is to return Native Hawaiians to the land. The homestead leasing program is effective as it is reflected in a 2017 HUD study on the housing need of Native Hawaiians. Native Hawaiians 50% or more, Native Hawaiians 50% or less, indicating that the lessee's housing burden is not only lower than the state average for Native Hawaiians, but also for residents of Hawaii households, but also lower than the national average. This is extremely important when you consider that just 2 weeks ago, there was a report of the median price of a single family home in the state of Hawaii has risen to $1 million or more. This program is effective. With regards to the history behind the Act, the 132nd original language as proposed by Prince Kuhio and supported by the territorial legislature, which was a reflection of everyone in Hawaii at the time, was for it to be 132nd. Later on, as Congress began deliberations and work began on the actual wording of the bill, 50% was something that was agreed upon. The blood quantum, as pointed out by administration, is something that other tribes and other Native Alaskans have opportunity to control themselves. However, we are part of this legislation, and currently, in order to succeed, you have to be 25% or more. So the vision and the implementation of this bill would reduce the blood quantum to 132nd or more. It's not a natural thing for Native Hawaiians to have blood quantum discussions. Our family lives all circle around genealogy and who you come from and where you come from. That is the first focus of who is Native Hawaiian and what your relationship is to the aina, or the land as defined as that which feeds you. So that relationship between Native Hawaiians and the land is something that's reciprocal, that was developed from the first settler here, probably in about 700 or 300 AD, depending on whose archaeology you find. Quoting from Uncle Pat, Chair, which you met in Hilo, and the president of the Keaukaha Community Association, it is the oldest Hawaiian homestead association on Hawaii Island. Uncle Pat articulated best when he's testified that those in the ohana, the family, and I'll say that again, those in the ohana, the family, structure should succeed to an award upon the death of the lessee for the sake of the families, the ohana's families' continuity.
you'll notice that anytime you talk to a Native Hawaiian leader from the homestead, the focus is always on the family, and it's always on the relationship to the homestead, the aina, which feeds. Another longtime advocate who was the great-granddaughter of the original lessee, Henry Wise, on the island of Molokai in Kalamaula, the first homestead, shared that her great-grandfather, Henry Wise, was one of the original homesteaders where she currently resides. Her testimony to the Hawaiian Homes Commission was summarized as follows. Many families, and I will emphasize the word family again, many families have expressed their concerns for the next generation to come. Everyone wants to leave their homesteads to their children and grandchildren. Her family has always grown fruits, vegetables, raised cows, pigs, chickens, and even geese and turkeys. They grow dryland taro, banana, papaya, lemon, lime, avocado, guava, lilikoi, and various vegetables. They sell taro leaf to the market and usually just eat the fruit and vegetables or share with family and neighbors.
Chairman.
So
Thank you very much for your testimony and for making us all hungry for that delicious. I would ask you to summarize it up at this point.
Yes, thank you very, very much, Chair. The importance, because I'm the husband of a homesteader. I do have 25%, so I can succeed. So this is a very personal matter to me. My sons can succeed, but their children cannot. The fact of being a homesteader, the fact that we can share our Hawaiian culture, we can share the ceremonies of our ancestors, that we can grow the food and grow the materials that are so important. And that's magnified by when an offering is made or a gift is made, that it comes from the aina, that which feeds, and it comes from a place-based family. That is the most important value that we can give. So I would just close that the adoption of Resolution 55, reducing the blunt quantum for successorship to 1/32, would acknowledge and would implement the original intent of Prince Jonah Kuhio Kalania Na'ole, as supported by the territorial legislature and the people of Hawaii at that time, is simply bringing completion to this. And then I would just add real quickly, we also support our Native brothers and sisters in their efforts to adopt their accompanying measures to this hearing. Thank you so much for your patience and your time.
Thank you, Chairman. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Julie Roberts-Hyslop, who is the second chief of the Tanana Tribal Council, for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Ledger Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on HR 441, which would convey property located in Tana, Alaska, to the Tana Tribal Council. We especially thank Congressman Young for his continued leadership on this legislation and strongly support swift passage of HR 441. This non-controversial bill has already passed the U.S. Senate 3 times, most recently as S 549, without any opposition, and we call upon the House of Representatives to act quickly so that we may move forward with providing essential health services to our very rural tribal community. The Tana Tribal Council is a federally recognized tribal government and a governing body to over 1,460 tribal members, and the village of Tana is predominantly Alaska Native rural community that is only accessible by airplane or by boat. Tana Tribal Council operates the Tana Health Center located 138 miles west of Fairbanks, Alaska, which is an urban center. The Tana Tribal Health Center provides mid-level outpatient services, 24-hour urgent care, outpatient alcohol counseling, and residential elders care. The facilities include the clinic buildings, housing units, and service buildings. HR 441 would require the Secretary of Health and Human Services to transfer Indian Health Service property to the tribe via warranty deed. The land transfer is essential to facilitating the construction of a new community wellness clinic. We are also considering expanding elder care and developing nursing care services on this land. Under the self-governance provision of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, the Tana Tribal Council has successfully worked with the Tana Chiefs Conference in carrying out a broad range of health service programs in Tana, Alaska. The ISDA and the tribe's agreements with the Indian Health Service gives the tribe the right to acquire fee titles to all federal property that the tribe uses to provide health services to its tribal members. The IHS has been very supportive and continues to work closely with Tana on the land transfer. The parcel of land that the tribe is requesting to have IHS transfer is the site of a former Indian Health Service hospital that has since been removed. The original plot of land encompasses 20.56 acres under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. 9.3 acres was transferred to Tusitna Limited, the village corporation. The tribe has requested transfer of the remaining 11.25 acres. IHS has begun on transferring the parcel by quitclaim deed. However, HR 441 would expedite the transfer without the need for a quitclaim deed. While the quitclaim deed would transfer the grantor's interest in the property, it would not guarantee that the title is valid and would include prohibitive terms and conditions that would act as an obstacle to mortgaging, leasing, or otherwise transferring any interest in the property or making major changes or capital improvements to the property without first gaining permission from IHS, even when the tribe uses its own funds for a project. As such, the tribe would not benefit from a quitclaim deed in the same way it would benefit from a warranty deed. In fact, the quitclaim deed would deprive the tribe of unencumbered and autonomous land ownership rights because property transferred under quitclaim would be treated as if it continued to be federally owned, allowing the IHS to have control over the tribe's use of its property. Further, any breach of the covenants remaining with the land would result in an immediate reversion of the title back to the government agency. A warranty deed would instead provide the tribe with greater security and title as well as flexibility in how the property is used to carry out health service programs for our tribal members in our efforts to leverage funding. HR 441 Section 1A1 requires the Secretary of HHS to transfer the parcel of land to the tribe by warranty deed within 180 days of enactment. In addition, the conveyance of the property by warranty deed shall not require any consideration from the tribe for the property, impose any obligation, terms, or conditions on Tana, and 3, allow any reversionary interest of the United States in the property. The legislation would provide language to shield Tana from any and all liability under federal or state laws for mitigation or other remedial action necessary by the presence of environmental contaminations. Again, we thank the committee for holding a hearing on this important legislation to transfer via deed 11.25 acres of land to the native village of Tana, consistent with federal policy and principles of self-governance. Enactment of HR 441 will enable our tribe to exercise full ownership rights in the transferred property. We respectfully ask the committee and her full House of Representatives to advance this legislation as soon as possible. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Second Chief Roberts Hislop, for your testimony and input. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Victoria Kichian, who is the chairwoman of the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska. Chairwoman?
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Legier Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, Chairman Grahava, Ranking Member Westerman, and members of the committee. Thank you for holding this hearing. My name is Victoria Kichian, and I'm the chairwoman of the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska. I'm here to tell our story of forced removals by the United States Army, our reservation that was established along the banks of the Missouri River, and the wrongful condemnation of our lands by the United States Army Corps of Engineers. I want to thank Congressman Fortenberry for introducing the Winnebago Land Transfer Act of 2021 and his commitment to the Winnebago people to righting this wrong. We also thank the bipartisan original co-sponsors, Representative Sharice Davids, a member of our sister tribe, the Ho-Chunk Nation, Representative Darren Soto, an esteemed member of this subcommittee, and Representative Randy Feenstra, our congressman on the Iowa side of our reservation where these lands are located. Today, Winnebago make our home on a reservation along the hills and banks of the Missouri River in northeastern Nebraska and northwestern Iowa. We have over 5,000 tribal members and tribal enterprises that employ thousands of employees in Nebraska, Iowa, and around the world. The Winnebago people are originally from present-day Wisconsin. In the mid-1800s, our people were forcibly removed from Wisconsin to Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota, and finally in 1865 to the Winnebago Indian Reservation in Nebraska and Iowa. Our treaty promised that land would be set apart for occupation, our future home of the Winnebago Indians forever. I'll say that again, forever. Unfortunately, the U.S. did not live up to this promise. In 1970, the Army Corps improperly and illegally condemned almost 2,000 acres of land on our reservation in Iowa and Nebraska. They filed 2 condemnation proceedings against the tribe, one in Iowa, one in Nebraska. Usually, the U.S. would be required to defend the tribe as part of its first responsibility for our land. However, because the Army Corps itself is a federal entity, the U.S. could not defend our interests. The tribe had to defend its own interests in multiple lawsuits, in multiple states, in multiple courts, on extremely short notice and with limited resources. Our chairman at the time, and Louis LaRose, now one of our precious elders, tells an account that the tribe only had 1 day to get a lawyer to defend its lands. The tribe initially lost in both courts. When the tribe appealed to the Federal Court of Appeals, the tribe prevailed in its lawsuit in Nebraska. The Court of Appeals found that the Army Corps did not have the congressional authorization to condemn our reservation lands. In a separate action, the tribe also appealed the Iowa case to the Federal Court of Appeals. The Eighth Circuit found that the condemnation of the Iowa land was improper, but because the tribe's attorney did not preserve the issue for appeal, the land wasn't returned to the tribe due to res judicata. The tribe has been fighting for return of our land ever since. The tribe exhausted its remedies in the court system. Congressional relief is our last hope. After 50 years, the Winnebago people deserve to have this injustice rectified. The land in this bill is mostly woodland and marsh along the Iowa side of the Missouri River and recreational hunting and fishing area. If restored to us, the Winnebago Wildlife and Parks Department would be responsible for this land like all of our other land. The department oversees hunting and fishing on 10,000 acres of woodland on the Nebraska side of the Missouri River. Hunters come from all over the country to hunt at Winnebago. The department has experiences, resources to regulate recreational and conservation activities and ensure Winnebago laws and regulations are enforced. The department's website provides information on fees and regulations, offers online processes to obtain hunting and fishing licenses. The tribe would not make change to the conservation measures in place now by the U.S. Army Corps and the Iowa Department of DNR, or Iowa Department of Natural Resources. For 50 years, the Winnebago people have waited for this land to be returned. The bill has now been introduced to Congress 3 times. We hope this 3rd time is a charm. We hope it is a time for Congress to act and pass this bill to restore the promise our country made to us in a treaty, the supreme law of the land. Today's a special day. The return of this land is a heavy responsibility we carry. I started this morning with a prayer because I know our ancestors are with us today. I sincerely hope you will support us in this endeavor. And on behalf of the Winnebago people, I say Pinigigi.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kachian, for your testimony and your dedication to this cause. The chair now recognizes Mr. Walter Murillo, the president of the National Council of Urban Indian Health. President Murillo.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Ledger Fernandez, Ranking Member Young, and Chairman Grijalva, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Walter Murillo, and I'm a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And I serve as the board president of the National Council of Urban Indian Health Care. And I am the CEO of the Native Health Program in Phoenix. Let me start by saying thank you to the members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today on urban confer policies. I testify today in support of Chairman Grijalva's bipartisan Urban Indian Healthcare Confer Act, HR 5221. This legislation would require agencies and offices within the Department of Health and Human Services, such as CDC, SAMHSA, HRSA, and CMS, to confer with urban Indian organizations, or UIOs, on policies related to healthcare for urban Indians. Few are aware that urban confer policies are a response to decades of deliberate federal efforts, such as assimilation, termination, relocation, and boarding schools, that have resulted in 70% of American Indians and Alaska Native people living outside tribal jurisdictions. A clear communication pathway between federal health agencies and UIOs is imperative, especially during times like the COVID-19 pandemic, when policies are constantly changing and American Indians and Alaska Natives are the hardest hit. The pandemic has taught us that not having a Confer policy means agencies have no formal mechanism or requirement to receive our input on policies that impact us. Through the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, the Indian Health Service has a legal obligation to confer with UIOs. Unfortunately, the federal government has interpreted this to mean that only the IHS has the requirement to confer with UIOs. It's crucial that HHS and all its agencies it operates establish a formal confer process to communicate with UIOs on policies that impact them and Native patients living in urban areas. It's important to note that urban confer policies do not supplant or otherwise impact tribal consultation and the government-to-government relationship between tribes and federal agencies. Support for urban confer is strong among stakeholders in Indian country. Recently, the National Congress of American Indians passed a resolution to call for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary to implement an urban confer policy across the department and its divisions. We're grateful for the support of NCAI and in Indian country on this critical parity issue for UIOs in the IHS system. I applaud Representatives Grijalva, Betty McCollum, Tom Cole, Don Young, Bass, and Eleanor Holmes Norton for introducing the Urban Indian Healthcare Confer Act to allow the formal path of communication between UIOs and federal agencies. We would like to adhere to the phrase that no policies about us without us. Missed opportunities for awareness and information provided by UIOs regarding Native healthcare can be avoided through the confer process. For instance, key information regarding the vaccine distribution for initial COVID-19 vaccine rollout at the end of last year was poorly communicated to all UIOs and created unnecessary hardship and delays in access. HHS initially only directed tribal programs to choose vaccine distribution program. And when HHS was asked about whether UIOs needed to decide between receiving vaccines through the state or through the IHS, it was unclear for weeks as to whether they were expected to make this decision. Ultimately, HHS forced UIOs to decide between receiving the vaccine distribution from the state or the IHS the same day as the initial deadline. And some UIOs were informed by only on the date of the initial deadline. And in some cases, like ours, the Phoenix area office of the Indian Health Service had worked in advance to notify us of our decision-making deadline. As a result of our clinics, many experienced delays in the vaccine rollout. As a result of the experience, many delays in the vaccine rollout. Had this request and deadline been communicated to the UIOs in a timely manner, the UIOs would not have been forced to make a rush in judgment on the jurisdiction selection. This flawed process could have been avoided with an urban confer policy. HR 5221 is an essential parity issue for UIOs that ensures Native people residing in urban areas continue to have the access to high quality, culturally competent health services. We must move past the notion that only the IHS has a trust obligation to Native people, because the truth is the federal government has that responsibility to provide care for all Native people. Urban confer must be established across the HHS to improve further health care delivered to urban Indian patients. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important parity issue. I've provided written testimony to the committee, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, President Murillo, for your testimony. I want to thank all of the witnesses for their testimony on this third panel. I'd remind the members of that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. You know, the bills we're discussing today are unique in the sense that they address different issues across our Indigenous communities from Alaska to Hawaii to, Nebraska. But I think they are all in the spirit of preserving American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian ways of life and taking steps to ensure tribal self-determination and sovereign and indigenous preservation, whether that be through economic sovereignty, better healthcare, or greater access to historical homelands. You know, listening to this testimony, I also think that there's a key similarity in that the bills arise from extensive local community support for the bills. The Hawaiian Homelands Bill was supported and requested by Hawaiians. It passed and was signed into law in the state of Hawaii. The Pasquayaki described negotiations with the state of Arizona. The support for the bill comes from the state itself. Similarly, the bills coming from Alaska, Nebraska, and our urban Indians are requests for Congress to act on what is needed locally to do what is right. With that, Chairman Yucupicio, you noted in your testimony that the tribe pledged to work closely with the City of Tucson on criminal jurisdictional issues. Would you please elaborate on how the intergovernmental agreement covers criminal jurisdiction for the parcel of land being transferred?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, it's an honor and pleasure. I'm glad you asked me that question. We have been working with the City of Tucson forever. We have had agreements with them to guard our sacred cultural areas. You know, they help us out throughout. The forming of this is nothing different for them. They have been helping us forever, and this would form a committee between us and them to sit down and really evaluate and figure out all the jurisdictional issues. But we have done that throughout the last, I would say, more than 40, 50 years. I come from that community, and I notice when there's a presence there and the help that they do, whether it's fire, whether it's police, or anything else that comes into my village. I live there currently right now, and I really thank you for asking that. But we have started this bill, but it's way beyond the bill. Our community dates back way before 1500 in that area along the Santa Cruz River Basin. And the evidence of that is the repatriations of souls that we did jointly with the U.S. Forest Service, the City of Tucson, and their new court building to repatriate those souls that were buried in an ancient burial ground where the new court system for the city and the county are. And that's the kind of relationship we have with the city and continue having that. That's why that letter from the city and their support, the county, the state is so important. We have had great relationships with all of them, and we'll continue.
Thank you very much. And I think that that is also a model that is being used, but also can help illustrate across the country, whether it be in Nebraska addressing the hunting issues or there in Pasquayaki. I wanted to ask President Murillo, thank you so much for describing the support that tribes have for expanding the Confer policy to all of IHHS. We will take the NCII resolution into the record. Would you like to expand on why there is such support among the tribes for the Confer policy?
Well, thank you for the question, Chairwoman. We feel that it's the members' families that live in the urban Indian areas that seek healthcare at UIOs. I think that we are very honored to have the support of tribes and tribal leaders and also not just for our regulation and policy, but within the budgeting process and to try and clear the path so that we don't have so many barriers to providing that healthcare to really family members. The health considerations don't change when people move to the urban areas. Only their ability to access that care changes. And this is one area where we can help reduce those barriers.
Thank you very much. And I see that my time is running near, so I will once again thank the Winnebago tribe and Alaska, the Tananas, for their testimony in Hawaii, but I don't really have time to ask more questions. I am very appreciative of what you have shared with us today. I will now recognize the ranking member, Representative Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses again. A good testimony. Honorable Julie Roberts, can you describe the importance of receiving the land by warranty deed? You did it in your testimony, but explain it as simple as you can why that's important instead of a quick claim deed.
Thank you, Congressman Young. The meaning behind our warranty deed would give us the leeway to develop the property to help the tribal members in the community of Tana, but also, we're going to do outreach to not only the members in our own community, but other members across Alaska in our wellness program. We've been working on a wellness program here in Tana for over 20 years now, ever since the old hospital was torn down. And so a warranty deed would really give us a good opportunity to get a really good start on developing that plan that we have for years. Thank you, Congressman.
Well, thank you. And if I have my way through this legislation, it will be a warranty deed. Then brings me up to my second question. Mr. Smith, the Indian Health Service, had suggested that the 180-day time frame to transfer the land to Tana could be problematic. Where do you see the problems? I am very frustrated they're saying 120, but where do you see? Is there any problems that you see?
Currently, we've been working on an environmental cleanup on the property with Indian Health Service for over 20 years now. And so we're just monitoring the remaining work that they require of us, but everything else is ready to go to get a new clinic built, to develop office space, and to set up a good wellness program. And so I don't really see the need to hold up, our progress here in Tana when we've been working on this for over 20 years now to try to get this program up and going. And it's really needed here in Alaska for a wellness. We have a lot of issues with, problems. So we're really trying to help, develop a really good program for not only Tana, but for Alaska.
Thank you, Julie, because, I'm pretty well aware of Tanana's health contribution over the years. Because I'm upstream Fort Yukon and you're downstream in Tanana. Morris Thompson and I used to talk about this medical facility and the need for replacement many, many years ago. And again, Madam Chair, I think this is crucially important, as I don't want the delaying factor. The work has been done, and to have a bureaucrats say, oh, we have to wait, that's just pure nonsense. So Judy, thank you. And if everything works out right, we're going to get this done. Thank you for your testimony, and God bless you for representing the people of Tana and the rest of I would call the Yukon. That's very important to me, as you know. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you to the committee members. Thank you very much for your consideration today.
Madam Chair, I yield back, and I do have to go to another meeting, Madam Chair, so I am going to excuse myself. I've had my witness testify and the other witnesses here. As I said in my opening statement, I support these bills. All the authors have asked me, and I do think they will work. Let's get it done. That's all I ask to do.
Thank you, Chairman Young, for your participation and your support for the legislation. The chair would now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Representative Gallego.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And questions first, the panelists. Chairman Yucapizzo, it's great to see you here today. Thank you, and always thank you for your friendship too. And I'm proud to support the legislation that the Pascua Yaqui tribe has before us today. I was hoping, though, you could elaborate on how passing this legislation will allow your tribe to improve its self-determination and self-governance.
For us, I think, to be able to still practice our culture in spite of all the industrialization that city and towns create in the area, we have been there way before the city expanded that way. For us, protecting that is first and foremost. When you start looking at the livelihoods and the people that live there, they still, in the old ways, even going to school, going to high school, going to colleges there, that is considered the Yaqui village of Tucson. And that would enhance and protect our determination to still live there in spite of the ever-growing, metro and city and everything. Guadalupe is just the same way. For us, it was founded by Yaquis. It became, my grandfather was part of that in that area. But Old Pascua has been there from time immemorial. We checked with our land cultural specialist here, and his name is Carl. He's an anthropologist or a scientist, and he said you can date your tribe somewhere in the Santa Cruz River basins to 800 BC. That's the answer he gave us. And for us, it's just protecting everything that's around there that our ancestors left us and gifted us with a way of life, with a way of living, and the way of surviving, even in spite of all this pandemic and everything else, that we may continue there serving in the greater whole of what it's become Tucson. So it's an honor to say we are preserving our community there. We have other recognized Yaqui communities from Scottsdale all the way down here to the reservation, but the reservation was then gifted in the 1960s. And these right here, the communities are way older than that. That is the preservation of our sovereignty and our culture.
Thank you, Chairman, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. My next question is for Mr. Murillo. I also want to thank you, Mr. Murillo, for being here. You know how much I appreciate the excellent work you do with Native Health in my district, and I brag about you all the time about Native Health. So my question for you is, how would the implementation of HR 5221 change UIO's day-to-day operations? And would an urban confer requirement help you meet the healthcare needs of your patients?
Thank you, Congressman Gallego. We really appreciate your support. Your continued support has been very important to us during this crisis. I think the impact on the day-to-day basis would affect us. We can see that in the pandemic. Fortunately, the Phoenix area had done a good job of notifying our program of the selection, but some areas, some programs received no word of jurisdiction selection. And that caused delays. That caused delays in getting vaccines to the people, American Indians, Alaska Natives of those urban areas. Some of the other ways are the regulations that we face in assisting American Indians, Alaska Natives in the urban areas. I believe somebody mentioned earlier that the passage of the VA bill and the lack of requirement of the VA to confer with urban Indian health programs. It still creates issues and barriers in coordinating that care. And that's important. Within the HHS itself, there's many opportunities to discuss issues. HRSA is a good example within the department. Urban Indian health programs are dependent on the 340B program, are dependent on the HIPSA for loan repayment and development of their workforce. And some of us that are dually funded also need to coordinate issues of governance, of reporting, and other requirements that we just don't have the opportunity to do directly with HRSA, but we have to nonetheless do them through the Indian Health Service, much like CMS. And while we appreciate the Indian Health Service acting on our behalf, they certainly don't know our issues from top to bottom. And that affects us every day.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Murillo. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Gallego. The chair would now recognize Representative Obernolte if he is with us. If Representative Obernolte is not with us, the chair would now recognize Representative Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Aloha, Chairman Ayla. Thank you for waking up early to join us. Could you explain what happens to homestead lands when a lessee cannot find a qualifying relative to inherit the lot? And you touched on this in your testimony, but can you go over the effect or lack thereof successorship has on new or waitlisted applicants?
Thank you, Representative. The opportunity, of course, to get on homestead land for an applicant or a beneficiary who's not a blood relative, of course, is an exciting opportunity. However, with that exciting opportunity and that hope, the inverse side of that, of course, is that family that is displaced. and the anxiety and the hopelessness that is felt by that family, because this tie to again the aina, that which feeds, is severed, and it is catastrophic psychologically for the family that is separated. It is bittersweet for the family that comes in and is able to occupy that land. So there are extreme negative impacts on one family and positive impacts on another family. This bill would allow the families to continue that relationship to their family and the aina. The real solution, however, is providing the department with additional resources so that we can get all of the 28,000 applicants off the wait list and onto their own land. That is what the vision of Prince Kohio was.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. The chair will now recognize the chair of the whole committee, Chairman Grijalva.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you again for the hearings. Good, and as my friend Congressman Young said, the ranking member, every one of these pieces of legislation merit support and consideration, and hopefully you and I can move those forward as quickly as possible. Let me begin with my friend, Chairman Yucupicio, HR 4881. Much of what the questions I had for you, Chairman, you answered in your opening statement. But, you went from 1978 when the tribe had 500 enrolled members, and now it's at 22,000 members. And so just tell us the investment and in the development of this parcel, that part of the land trade, the land exchange. Tell us what that does in terms of servicing now and meeting the needs of a membership that from 1978 to now is 22,000 from 500.
Thank you. How are you doing? Que Dios te bendiga, Raúl.
Gracias, hermano.
That I remember as a young boy there, I was born 1957 there in Old Pasco, the village. And those elders wanted to see, how do we provide health services? How do we educate our tribal members there in the Yaqui village? We had so little, outhouses, no running water, houses made out of cardboard and tin. Maybe a lot of tribes had the same way of living there in the 50s and 60s and before that, 1920s, 1930s. For us, we just couldn't understand why everything was growing so fast and everything was getting modernized. And what happened to us? At that time, the leaders there of Old Pascua appointed Mr. Anselmo Valencia. And Anselmo Valencia, for the record, was one of our great cultural, spiritual leaders. He was tasked with the ordinary strength and license to go and seek and see how we could get educated, get health care, get housing, get all that. And he said a lot of tribes already have that, but they're federally recognized. And he pushed for federal recognition. Him and Mo Udall and a lot of members of Congress helped us out. For us, I think, when you look at 1978 being recognized, for us, it was a blessed day. However, the enrollment was low because everybody was afraid. Like, I'm not going to live way out there. I'm not going to live in the desert. There's no water. It floods. There is no houses over there. How are we going to survive in the desert? At that time, the barrier here is the Tucson Mountains. And on this side of the west side, there was absolutely nothing. And that's why it was tentative. And later on, once we established a reservation, everybody started moving out, then enrollment spiked and kept spiking. Today, we don't want to leave anybody out. And I truly believe there is a mechanism of tribal sovereignty when you start looking at directly to descendancy. We have a quarter quantum which limits us. But for us, I think it's very important to recognize that Yaquis have been here, will be here, and will continue being here. Even if we weren't 22,000. We went from probably the youngest tribe being recognized in 1978 to, I believe, still the 4th or 5th largest tribe in population in the state of Arizona. And we are proud of that, you know, for us, they helped us out get there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Working with you and the tribe, let me congratulate yourself and the council and the leadership of Pascua Yaqui tribe. You're coming first circle. I think it's really important to remember that. And you said it. Old Pascua is the ancestral location on deeded land where the Yaqui Nation established itself in southern Arizona, and from there has grown and has this tribe. And I think we're bringing resources back to that area, reincorporating that area into the full life of the tribe. And I think it's historically coming full circle and connecting it. And I want to congratulate you for that and thank you. Mr. Murillo, what's the difference between UIO communications with the Indian Health Service and with other Department of Human Services, Health and Human Services departments? What's the difference? And talk about that parity issue where UIOs are treated differently from other IHS and tribal components. Talk about what this legislation is trying to address.
Sure, Chairman. Thank you. And I'll try to be as brief as I can. As I mentioned before, a great example of this might be with HRSA, with so many programs that dictate our ability to provide direct care to American Indians, Alaska Natives, and urban areas. Right now, there is a HRSA IHS work group, and we appreciate the Indian Health Service for involving themselves with that. But it is a burden to the Indian Health Service, but it also doesn't provide for direct communication with HRSA. So how can we represent to HRSA the day-to-day operational issues that we face as an FQHC? And we can't do that when we're passing that through a non-operative office like the Indian Health Service. Also, had there been a relationship with the CDC, for example, the consultation on vaccine rollout might have happened faster, or with HHS directly. Also, there was an additional $125 million appropriated through one of the coronavirus appropriations, and that has yet to be distributed to the UIOs, even though we were included in the Authorization Act. So there's issues like that we could work directly with the operating divisions of HHS, and issuance and direct care could happen much faster.
Thank you, and yield back, and I want to acknowledge the comments that Mr. Case made, Madam Chair, and I think his issue about acknowledgement and engagement with Native Hawaiians with the federal government is an important point, and also Ms. Stansberry's about a more universal approach in terms of the language going down the road that we're trying to address with HHS and this particular bill 5221. So thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Chair Grijalva, for your leadership on these issues as well, and recognizing the entire big picture that sometimes we work on small things, but what we need is, or smaller things in the bigger picture, and moving those out. I now want to recognize the Representative Rosendale for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you to each of the panelists for joining us today. Montana is home to 8 recognized tribes and several urban Indian organizations. So I certainly appreciate how vital these issues are to all of our constituents. Mr. Murillo, you made a statement earlier, and I really, it's stuck in my head. No policies about us without us. You know, if none of us take anything from this hearing today, that should be the one sign, okay? That one statement that everybody should be able to take home and make sure that they remember. That being said, I'd like to ask you the same thing that I asked Mr. Smith earlier, and that is, how do you anticipate that HR 5221 affecting your relationship with HHS, and how do you hope to see it improve? I'm trying to drill down and see the specific areas where you think that we're going to be able to have impact.
Great, thank you. I think the the theme of no policies without us is very important, and I think it goes directly to your question. The department has a obligation to consult with tribes, and we absolutely respect that. The government to government relationship is not something we'd like to have interfere in, but only expand. Where it relates to urban Indian health programs, in a direct way, I think I've covered a couple with the CDC and with HRSA. These aren't very pie in the sky. These are very practical barriers, very practical issues dealing with bureaucracy, dealing with regulation, that if we could have input in, we could really work together with the departments of HHS and with the department itself to let them know what issues we're facing and how we could work together to overcome those obstacles to provide care to American Indians, Alaska Natives in the urban areas.
So let me continue. In your written testimony, you indicated that the urban Indian organizations experience parity issues, and you had made reference to that. How else can Congress close the parity gap with the urban Indian organizations?
Well, we've sought parity in a number of areas. For example, the 100% FMAP issue with CMS and reimbursement for states at 100% for Medicaid recipients in the states. Also with the VA. And so while we've had some success with great support of this committee, there's still areas in which we operate, in which we face bureaucratic barriers as opposed to service delivery barriers. We have a great desire to see the American Indians, Alaska Natives, and provide them the care that we can. But where we face bureaucratic issues, I think we could work out better where we could converse with, in a formal way, the divisions of HHS. And I think this is important to be said because I think somebody mentioned that proactively these departments can ask us questions at any time. But that hasn't been our experience. Our experience is that we have to raise our hand and complain and come to members of Congress to talk about these issues rather than having a direct formal dialogue.
So I would really love when you have an opportunity to, if you could just put a letter together and put some of these areas where you know right now that you've got these bureaucratic problems that are not really helping deliver any kind of service whatsoever, that they seem to be in place that are not serving any purpose, so that we can take nibbles and bites at these processes to either change them or eliminate them, so that we can make sure that we have this interaction, if you will, between the parties, and make sure that it helps to deliver services instead of becomes a burden and gets in the way.
Thank you, Congressman Rosendale. We'll be happy to provide that information to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Chair, I would yield back. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Representative, and for reminding us of that excellent testimony and quote. The chair will now recognize Representative Soto from the state of Florida.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I always love how you pronounce our state. Como en Hispano. Thank you so much. I want to talk a little bit about HR 2402 relating to transferring ancestral lands back to the Winnebago tribe. You know, this committee from its onset, and I'm excited to be in my 5th year on it, is really about righting historic wrongs, enforcing treaties between the United States and sovereign tribes, and greatly improving the relationship between these two sovereign entities, while at the same time recognizing that we're all Americans from different backgrounds. So I was excited when Representative Fortenberry approached me about co-introducing this bill with him. He described what was a beautiful hilly and rich land nestled on the Missouri River that was taken by the Army Corps of Engineers years ago by eminent domain, and that it's time. It's time to return these ancestral lands to the Winnebago people. So honor with co-sponsoring it, co-introducing it, assisting with getting the bill on today's agenda, and looking forward to supporting it. Want to hear from Chairwoman Victoria Kitchien. Can you please go into in a little more detail why this is so important, what the Winnebago tribe's vision is for this area, and how it can benefit both your people and folks across the area?
Certainly. This has been a historic endeavor for the tribe, and I have to thank our past, present, and future leaders that are going to take care of this land if it passes. And it's a part of the nation-to-nation conversation that we're having today, and the treaty rights of the Winnebago people, and that continue to be honored, and that the leadership from the Winnebago tribe with our federal partners can work towards honoring that in perpetuity. And I thank you for your leadership on this, and you recognizing that we have to continue to honor the tribal voice, the nation-to-nation conversation, and that no one can take away that from a tribal nation, and that's distinct. You know, there's no other entity, organization, or person that can take that from a tribe. And so I really appreciate you recognizing how special returning this land as it's so sacred to the Winnebago people. And so it's a significant part of how we'll manage that under our Wildlife and Parks Department, and that we have the mechanisms in place to care for it just as much as the Army Corps Iowa Department of Natural Resources did, if not better. So we really open up our arms to embracing what was placed in our treaty on behalf of the Winnebago people.
Well, thank you so much, Chairwoman Kitchien, for explaining that in great detail. We're excited to be part of this righting of a long-time injustice and restoring your ancestral homelands to you all. And with that, I yield back.
You got my word in.
Thank you, Representative. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Oregon, Representative Benz. I understand, Representative Benz, that you do not want to ask any further questions?
Well, since I'm on, I'm happy to ask one. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank all the witnesses today of really an incredibly interesting conversation. Interesting because I've spent a lot of time as a lawyer in real estate matters, and so the transfer of real estate's something I've done a lot of. And so I just have a question for Chief Edwardson on the quitclaim versus the warranty deed discussion, and then the reference to the fact that there would be no liability for the tribe should the tribe acquire that land, and I hope it does. But I hope there's no liability. And I'm just curious, if the federal government may say there's no liability, what about the state? Is Alaska saying, hey, you're fine? Is that what's going to happen? Are you safe from the state when it comes to environmental issues?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. The state of Alaska and the Indian Health Service are two separate governmental organizations, and the tribe has been working diligently to clean the property for the past 20 years. And I believe we've done a really good job of making sure that all of the different contaminants were taken out of the ground. And we've had really good success working with our contractors and making sure, that we're monitoring the water quality. And so, when it comes down to, the state and versus, the federal government, we adhere to all of the environmental laws, because we are Indigenous people, and, we really, take pride in making sure, that we keep our lands pristine as possible. And so, having this land taken, under a warranty deed would really enable us to move forward more quickly without having to go back to the federal government and asking for permission to do certain kinds of things like to build a new facility. So the process would be a lot quicker. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, just I'm sure it's being discussed. My other question is to Chairwoman Kachayan. I'm sorry for not pronouncing that correctly, but it has to do with the same issue. And if that land, the whatever 1,500 acres or whatever it is transferred back after having been in the hands of the Corps of Engineers for 50 years, I'm just curious if the tribe's going to be safe from whatever activities the Corps carried out on it. Because it seems to me taking it back is one thing, but making sure you get it back in proper condition is another. So I'm just curious, has that issue been addressed?
Thank you, sir. My name is Victoria Kichian, and what's interesting enough is that the Army Corps of Engineers made no improvements to the land. And in this time, it's been managed by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources under an agreement. And the tribe intends to keep this land under conservation. And so we're equipped and ready to facilitate that conservation and hunting on behalf of, all those Nebraskans, Iowans, and Americans that, want to come visit our tribal nation and share in the good hunting and fishing.
Right, well, thank you for that. And I did do some reading during your testimony. I was going online and checking to see how the land was being used. And it sounds as though you do have a bit of a challenge there in dealing with the local community when you do get the land back. But I'm sure you're up to it, and I do wish you the very best in all of you in these endeavors. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Bentz. Those were very useful questions for the committee to understand further these issues. And the chair will now recognize the gentleman from Hawaii, Representative Case.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Chair Ayla, first of all, thank you for your kind comments. You have been at this a lot longer than me through a whole range of areas, from ocean conservation to supervising and discharging our obligations to our natural resources, and of course in the Native Hawaiian community. So I thank you for your service. I want to emphasize or put some emphasis on the relevance of your testimony here to this committee in support of HCA Res 55. And so let's just review the history here. The Hawaiian Homes Commission Act was passed in 1921. The federal government was responsible for the discharge of its obligations and for the administration and implementation of that act for 39 years until statehood for Hawaii in 1959. In 1959, we became a state. And under the Admissions Act, we, the people of Hawaii, undertook the direct obligation to discharge the responsibility of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act to the beneficiaries of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. And that obligation was then a state of Hawaii obligation. And the obligation is carried out through the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and the Hawaiian Homes Commission. And you are chair of the Hawaiian Homes Commission. So when you speak here today, in support of HCA Res 55, you are speaking as, I would call it, the point of the spear for the state of Hawaii's obligation to the beneficiaries. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, and it also comes with the weight of the commission. The commission voted to support this resolution.
Right, absolutely. So this is us speaking through you, all of us, not just Native Hawaiians, all of us in the state, speaking through you and telling this committee that this is what the state of Hawaii wants to do.
Yes, as it was pointed out by Chair Fernandez, and it was very clear. There is overwhelming support here in the state of Hawaii.
And I just want to emphasize that as well, because again, the law today, the federal law today, provides the state of Hawaii the right to amend the federal law in some cases, and the right to amend the federal law with the consent of Congress in other cases. And we're in the latter category here, right? So we have already amended this law in the state legislature, subject only to the consent of Congress.
That is correct, Representative Case.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Let me go back to a point that Ms. Radewagen was asking you about. For the indigenous peoples of our country, housing and the land it's not a commodity. It's an ancestral relationship. You refer to it as the aina in Hawaiian, and that's what we call that obligation, that relationship. For the Native Hawaiian people who live on the Hawaiian homelands, this is their aina. That is a generational relationship with the land, correct?
It is more than that, Representative Case. It is part of the family. It is part of the reciprocal relationship between the people and the Aina. So it is something that I think most indigenous communities clearly understand innately. And the answer to your question is yes, absolutely.
Okay, and in that relationship, in that connection, Chair, I think you used the word psychologically devastating to be dispossessed from the land, and I want to put a point on that as well, because in this case, if there is not a way for Ohana family to remain on their ancestral lands because of the application of federal law at some point in what is now 5, maybe 6 generations on the land, the Hawaiian homelands, that dispossession is not just a dispossession from that land. The practical reality is that given the rate of home ownership for Native Hawaiians in Hawaii and that very high price of housing that you pointed out, they will most likely be dispossessed from Hawaii itself. Would you not say that that's a realistic reality of it?
It is, Representative Case, and we see every day the outmigration of Native Hawaiians to the continent because of that.
Okay, thank you. And then just the final point that I want to agree with you on, which is that oftentimes some people phrase this as a false choice between continuing homesteaders on the land and allowing those on the waiting list to come on the land. And that is a false choice because we do have the option, of course, of increasing the availability of homes on the land, which we are all dedicated to doing, correct?
That is correct, and we worked hard every day along with the congressional delegation and the legislature to do so.
Thank you again so much for your testimony and for your service. I yield back.
Mahalo.
Thank you, Representative Case. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the first panel, we had the opportunity to hear from the sponsors of bills and agencies. Now we are hearing from those who work directly in indigenous communities and to see and hear about the inequities firsthand. A question for three questions for Mr. Murillo. Thank you for joining us today, first of all. Can you walk us through the missteps that have occurred during the COVID-19 vaccine distribution and how urban Confer policies could have prevented this?
Thank you, Congressman Garcia, for the question. I think without formal policies, working with UIOs, it becomes hit and miss. As I mentioned, my own experience here in Phoenix, having a very good and open relationship with the IHS area, we were very much included in the decision-making process. But as the president of NACUI, I'm very well aware that a lot of our members weren't aware that choosing a jurisdiction on where to receive that vaccine, either through the state or through the Indian Health Service, wasn't made apparent to them. And I think I can illustrate what happens when something like that occurs, in that when we started receiving vaccines, basically day one that the Indian Health Service started receiving vaccines, we started distributing them to our elders in our immunocompromised communities right away. And other UIOs who might have chosen the state, they had to get in line. And as we know, the impact on urban Indian communities was very severe. And so having faster access to those vaccines, had they chosen the Indian Health Service as the delivery route to the vaccine, would have greatly helped some of the UIOs. So had HHS had a process for discussing that with urban Indian health programs, it might have prevented the delays that many UIOs experienced in receiving the vaccine and giving that to their elders and immunocompromised patients. That's one case in point. And another is with the CDC. Now, we understand that the government-to-government relationship requires HHS divisions to consult with tribes, and is right. But when divisions see that very finitely, that really locks out urbans. So we're not included in those discussions. So the consideration of how vaccine, how appropriated dollars, how other resources should come to UIOs we're not asked, and there's no requirement to ask us, and thus we're left out, or we're worse, an afterthought. And so I think those are some areas I can directly say impacted during this crisis.
Thank you. And finally, what HHS agency do you wish UIOs could confer with, and why would that improve outcomes for urban Indian health?
Well, we can see from the benefit of the Indian Health Service confer policy that really has positive impacts on the operations of UIOs. One area that I highlighted that might be where we interact quite a bit is also HRSA. Because of the workforce development and loan repayment programs, the HIPSA scores, for example, that affect UIOs as FQHCs, qualified health centers. The 340B drug program and the turmoil we had last year, having just one contractor, and the really cutoff of prescription medications and the access to them really impacted us quite a bit. And also to the CDC knowing and understanding data about the health status of American Indians in the urban areas is also very, very important.
Very well. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Garcia. And to our witnesses, thank you very much for taking the time to help us understand in more detail the benefits of each of these pieces of legislation, to the members for their excellent questions. I truly appreciate the support we've heard from the committee for the passage of each of these bills. The connection about the importance of the land, the Aina, I'm mispronouncing it, to the very existence of the Pasquayaki, the Winnebago, the Native Hawaiians, and also the importance and ability of Congress to help remove barriers and promote better healthcare among urban Indians and Alaska Natives. I can tell you that I will work with the chair, with our ranking members, and the sponsors to continue to move these bills forward. As I stated before, the members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to these in writings. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit written questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.